the conversation. It's the conversation. Y'all ready? Let's go. No filter, no restrictions. You about to get my opinion in its purest form. So my words, don't try to spin them. What I said is what I said, and what I said I meant it. The gloves are off now when I'm coming out swinging. So engage in verbal combat, but you better be ready. Cause this here for me is light work, even if the topic's heavy. I'm ready for it all with no running from nothing. You just take the time to digest what I put in, no rushing. But time is moving, don't waste it. You want the real, come and face it. Come sit and talk to me if you want it straight without a chaser. And it might burn a little when you step on up to taste it, but it's nothing harsh, I promise. Just a little conversation.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Conversation with Harold and Dave. I'm Keone. Of course, I'm here with the great Harold and the great Dave. And we're going to start off with what the hell is going on, because I need to know some things. You know, every time Dave travels up to the Northeast, Trump loses his mind. Dave, stay in North Carolina. Okay?
No.
Problem.
Why?
Name
And
calls to me, I'm afraid.
every
At
time
least
you
for
go.
3.5 years.
Yeah,
At least for 3.5 years, please.
right. But every
Don't go
time
anywhere, Dave.
shit hits the fan. I don't know. And Harold, this what the hell's going on with this constant attack on education? There's so much going on. Let's get into it. Now, I'll start with you, Dave, since we saw Harold last.
Uh, uh, well, it depends on which type of education you're talking about. I think the higher education is the one that's clearly under attack. There's just this belief that woke professors like me, right, a Rockefeller Republican of old, that we're the problem, and that there's this concept that because I don't know who hit the piano just then, but the idea that people go to college and become liberal and that they waste their time and all this stuff, and I think it's endemic of a lot of the approaches that they're misidentifying the problem. There aren't woke professors. I don't want to say my university. My university is the opposite of woke. And there are a lot of very good schools out there, and they're the thing is, I think they misidentify the problem, right, by trying to blame things on villains. And whether it's in education or other places, you try to blame your problems on bad actors, not on real issues like, what is the balance of college education versus trades? What are the opportunities for various things? What educational values are really worth it? And rather than saying with the scores of children in school, which very clearly dropped off because of COVID, right? Very clearly, to my mind, they dropped off because of that. And the thing is that it should not. So I mean, I don't know what the problem is. It's not about going in and diagnosing problems. It's about blaming it on villains and then pushing the villains out, which leaves you with no plan to address the basic issue. And so I think that we could just kind of paint that over just a whole lot of different issues that are going on. And so, said it before, I said it again, helicopter is on the pad.
All right. Well, there's nothing else to do there's nothing else for the first part to do, but then just to turn to Harold and go, Harold, what the hell?
Well, I mean, it's a couple of things, but to what David just kind of brought up, the bottom line is if I tell you during my campaign I love the uneducated, I'm going to do the best I can to unravel education straight and to the point, no chaser. But when I look at what the hell is going on, I'm looking at two things that happened this month. I'm looking at Erica. I think it's McArthur. Maybe you can help me with that pronunciation, Dave. But she's the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and when the poor jobs report came out, she got axed. in an effort to what? Now we're going to start fudging numbers, and that's going to be concerning because when the truth or hits and the stuff hits the fan, we won't know as a country how damaging things really are until they can no longer plug those holes or put those fingers in those holes to kind of plug the water from coming out. And the second thing I'm going to mention is Representative Nicole Collier from Texas, who was actually forced to sleep in the state house overnight after she returned as one of those 50 that had left the state in protest of the gerrymandering that's being attempted by Governor Greg Abbott in Texas. But to force an individual to sleep, that's basically a form of kidnapping. And I don't even know how, even this administration can tolerate that. But I guess because she's in opposition of what they want to transpire, that's why we're here. So when I think about what the hell is going on, those are the two things that initially come to mind for me.
All right. Well, oh, go ahead, Dave. You had something you were going to say?
No, no.
Oh, okay. Well, I just kept thinking, Dave, and you'll correct me if I misquote you. It was a bunch of episodes ago, and you talked about dictatorships and what they do, and you went down a checklist of things that dictators do and why this looks like a dictatorship to some people. And two of the things that you said in that checklist was control the media, and deploy troops. We've seen two of those things happen already.
Right.
So the attack on media, and if you say specific media, we talk about the issues with PBS, what's being done and talked about being done with NPR. I don't know if PBS is actually shut down. I know it's on the way out. The last report I saw said it was going to be shut down. So I don't know if that's actually still happening or not. But attack on media was the first thing, not the first, but one of the things you put on that checklist, which we've been seeing that since the first term, but it's getting ramped up now. Am I overreacting, Dave?
Possibly, because I'm not sure exactly what checklist you're talking. I think you're talking about the things I talked about Putin doing as a result of the war in Ukraine and how he's tightened his control.
I'll
And
tell you what I was talking about. I'll remind you. So we were talking about a comment of people saying that this has become a dictatorship and blah blah and a bunch of rhetoric, and you went down a list of what Putin did, and you said, well, that's typically not calling Trump a dictator, but you were saying typically the dictators play is these are the things that you do, and
right,
you went on a checklist.
that
Yeah.
makes sense. Trump's problem is he isn't a dictator,
Hmm.
right? That for all the attempts to do things, right? A dictator is in my in political science theoretical point of view. A dictator, the essence of those guys is that they need support from a small group of supporters, right? That to stay in power, they just need a small coalition of supporters, and that they can then, just by providing them private benefit, stay in power. They don't need to worry about the population, large parts of the population supporting them. Therefore, they don't have to perform on policy issues. The thing is, if you have what's called a large coalition system, where you have a large number of people that you need to get their support to stay in power, you can't just buy those people off. And even, it even in the United States, even with the changes that are coming, we still have a large coalition system, and the problem you've got is that people will, react negatively to performance and to poor performance. And so I think that Trump's big problem is he is, to the extent that he is acting like an authoritarian leader, which it's hard not to say that he is. He is rolling out all these executive actions that are consolidating power in the White House, and he's acting. He still is in a situation where he's got to, and all the leadership in the country have to get support from large numbers of people, and they are going to be held accountable for the performance of the country. And to my mind, and I could be wrong on this, but where I am is like, look, what matters is how things go. And what matters is how groups of people who are not following politics, who are not worried about, whether Putin has been invited or not, or, they're not following closely enough. They're just to make their decision. They're making their decision off their pocketbook, off their assessment of the way the country's going. If those people are pissed, he's done, and the Democrats are going to be done. And so that's the key thing. And like I say, we have to be watching for this swing block. We have to be looking at the actual things that are happening in the country, because that's going to move the needle one way or the other. I'm pretty convinced that that's what did Biden in eventually, was that people just said, hey, prices are high, the economy's bad, we're going to blame Biden, right? The swing voters. So I think he's fundamentally making mistakes because he's still got he's not responding to the institutional set incentives, right? He's acting like a dictator in a system where he isn't one. And eventually, I think that is going to they're going to lose. That's going to play out in the midterms. I think very definitely.
Yep.
Well, I would say that I think part of the problem is the same way that this current president doesn't even know what it means to be a president, or doesn't know how to be a president. He definitely doesn't know how to be a dictator, and he's just fumbling his way through, assuming how Kim, how Putin, and how others got into their respective roles and how they make decisions. He is totally clueless because he's not from that system. And we know that he doesn't read, we know that he doesn't study, and so he'll never learn how to. Yes, you got a book, a Mein Kampf, which I haven't read yet, so I don't know all of the different elements that are being communicated or conveyed, and maybe Dave, enlighten me or enlighten us if he's read it as well. But the bottom line is, he is very bad at doing what he's doing. If he's bad at being a businessman, I don't know what assumptions were made that he would also be a suitable, not just a suitable president, but a successful president, considering what has transpired up to this point. So, moving forward, we'll see. But Dave, don't go north for the next 3.5 years. So if you don't have any crazy stuff going on, that's all I'm saying. And I
Next
land my
Tuesday,
plane.
dude. Next Tuesday,
Oh
I'm
God,
north.
it's gonna be a rough week. But so one of the things you said, Harold, just because he's been a bad businessman, wouldn't make him a good president. Well, a lot of people. Well, I'll take that back. A lot of people. Now I'm being facetious. I would hear people often say that voted for him. I voted for him because I want this country to be run like a business, like it should. And I think Dave, I can't remember if you or the economist was on was saying, yeah, that's always a terrible idea. You can't run this company like a business. I mean, this country like a business. That doesn't work.
No, and the political system, democracies and all governments are very messy. They're very inefficient as decision makings and systems. But democracies absolutely run better than non-democracies, and they do certain things well. And I think one of the big problems you have is that politicians have to deal with very nuanced differences. And I think that and this is something that I think is going to happen is people don't like the government. They like the idea in the abstract of cutting government funding and cutting, but they freaking love their stuff. They love their services. They love the things that they get. And they depend on the government for a whole lot of things. And it's always been understood that when you rail against the government, you you don't mess with things, right? I mean, the at the top of the list is you don't mess with Social Security, right? And these other things, and you don't mess with a lot of these services, and they're they're ignoring that, right? Because they're not getting the subtlety that there was a part you never publicly acknowledged. And I think a lot of these guys are in this administration. He has a lot of true believers who have a very black and white view of the world, and they have a very simplistic understanding of how things work. And I think it's very characteristic of a lot of MAGA folks is that they simply do not understand how a tariff works. They don't understand who pays. I mean, just simple things that aren't about facts. It's not about fact checking. It's just simple things. The Bureau of Labor Statistics. Why do they revise things in previous months? It's because they send out surveys, and their first estimate is based on the first batch of surveys they get. Then the next estimate is based off of those surveys plus all the others they got back in that intervening time period. And then the next one is based on another group. And so the thing is that there is no way you're not adjusting this, you're not estimating. This is a process that is just automatic. And when you see something like these wild changes that were really weirdly large changes, the way they were, if you understood the way they went about coming up with those numbers, you'd be going, what's going on in the world that this happened, not what's going on with the statisticians. But they don't do that. They blame it. You vilify others. That's the problem. The problem is always villainous, dangerous others, and you're not dealing with reality. And so it keeps cropping up, I think.
And if I could add to that, I think what a lot of people miss about government is not a for-profit venture. They operate on zero-based budgets for the most part, and you have to basically spend it all. And if you're going to run the government like a business, you got to take away that first piece so that it can have some level of profitability. But again, they don't even want a balanced budget, much less to get away from the zero-based budget accounting practices that we have. But I digress.
Next big one, second and third time troops have been utilized on U.S. soil. We know about L.A., but now we have the president mobilizing the National Guard to help slow down the crime in D.C. because it's a very filthy, 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 crime-ridden area, and we need to take it back. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And then he named a bunch of cities that are coming next. And so I'm sitting here, and Dave, you were in the military. I'm sitting here going, there's not enough military police to do this in all major cities. That's number one. So that tells me, are you just going to be using regular troops? Because that's a terrible idea, because troops aren't policemen. We've seen, I know how to detain an insurgent in Iraq, but I don't know how to police United States citizens. That sounds like an utter disaster. The biggest problem is one of the biggest problems that's pointed out is DC, just like many cities around the world, in the United States specifically, have had a decrease in crime, especially violent crimes. Violent crimes is down 22 to 26% in 2025, year to date compared to the same period in 2024, which saw a 35% decrease in 2023. So that's a 35% decrease in 2023, and then another 22 to 26% decrease from 2024 to 2025. Homicides are also down 12 to 13%. Property crime has seen a slight increase as well, but that's 2.5% year. However, it's crucial to consider that 2023 was a year with significant increase in crime across DC and the country for that slight period of time. Baltimore is enjoying a historical run of 365 days from a significant historic drop in homicides at 165, which is 36% drop, and they've had a steady drop over 10 years. So why do we feel the need to point out two places that are having historical lows in crime as we need to get the National Guard in there and stop all the crime? Are we talking white collar crime, or are we just talking pickpockets and armed robbery? Like, what are we doing here?
There's clearly no need, right? And in some ways, that's good for Trump because there is no crime, no major crime in DC. There's crime, right? It's an urban area. But hey, I grew up in the 80s around New York City, man. And
Hmm.
uh, I know what a urban hellscape is. And I go to New York City now and I'm like, this is freaking Disney World. And I go to any other city in the United States, and I'm just like, I can see, but I'm old, right? And also, a lot of Trump supporters are rural. They're although that map, when you see the map, they love to show with all the red, right? There's so much red because people live in the middle in these rural areas, so they don't experience it. They just hear what people tell them. And so the thing though is he's not going to be proved wrong, right? Because there is no crime to solve. So you go put the troops in, well, there's no crime, right? And so unless you think that putting troops on the ground is going to create crime, you know,
Well, I mean, someone did almost just get a felony for hitting a military person with a sandwich. So
I mean, yeah. And so, I mean, that's one part of it. Another part of it, I think, um, is it really is, there's nothing for them to do, right? And in fact, you're seeing a lot of these guys go in, they're unarmed, right? A lot of folks are very worried about the military being too violent. They're not giving these guys bullets. They're not sending them out the door with an M4 even, right? Why would you do that, right? Why would you give a full magazine to someone in an American city? Because all they can do is kill innocent bystanders.
well, I mean, I thought that would be the thing to do if it's we need to take the streets back because they're overridden with crime.
Right, but they're not. So, and no commander is good as put their guys out there, and they're not going to let them go out the door with even an empty M4. Why? Because someone could steal it, right? So a lot of the troops in DC, right, are in fact unarmed, right, and they're manning checkpoints with police around to provide backup. So they're providing this labor. So, and again, they don't need to do anything because there's nothing to do. The question is, will this create protests? Is it a nothing burger, right? His deployment of troops to California turned out to be a giant nothing burger, right? Nothing really came out of it. Um, will it become nothing? Will it spark protests, right? And also legally, he's got a lot more ability to do things in DC than he has because he's essentially like the governor, right? It's kind of like the governor of a state can do stuff in cities. He's sort of, although Congress is technically in that role, he's got some authority. In Baltimore, he's got zero authority, and what are you going to do, right? There's nothing to do. So it's hugely symbolic. I don't get too overly stressed by it because there's nothing they really are going to be able to do.
I think the people that are most stressed about are the people that live in the areas that he's pointing out. I mean, I'm in Morrisville, North Carolina. He doesn't even know this place exists. Okay, so I don't have to worry about anything. Um,
Just one last thing, though. One possibility, I just remind you, when the Soviet Union was kind of towards the end of the Soviet Union, there was a coup. They put the military in the street. They surrounded the Russian White House, and Boris Yeltsin went out and stood on a tank and cheered on his. It became absurd, right? And it totally backfired. And so there is an opportunity for protesters to, we're going to see protests, and it's going to be interesting to see how they play out and how they resonate. And it's too early to tell what the protesters are going to do. We just saw JD Vance walking through a Union Station with people in the crowd yelling him to go, shtup a couch. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, he was just being brutally dragged by the crowd.
Oh, I have to find that video.
But is that going to be the norm? Is that how it's going to play out? And what are the protests going to be? Because that's the real danger. If you have bored troops who have no idea why they're there and there's not really anything for them to do, how are they going to interact with people? And how is this going to play out as theater? Is it going to play out the way Trump hopes? I don't know. I'm sorry. I'll put my train into Union Station and leave it there.
No, Harold, I'm going to ask you this because, many times people will try to draw the line to make it a racial issue. But
Okay.
sometimes you can't help it because the cities he named, of possibly doing this too, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Baltimore, and Oakland, even though there are cities that have a higher crime rate than those and one more city that I forgot that he mentioned all have black mayors. So they all feel like they're particularly under siege. So we can say that, hey, that's not, we're grasping at straws. But when it looks that way, the aesthetics, those people that make that argument, you can't really tell them they're wrong.
Well, I mean, and that essentially that's one of the points that I was going to bring up as it relates to what David was talking about. When you look at the cities that he's targeting, the cities that he's putting a quote unquote focus on, they're all black cities or large black cities, that are quote unquote Democratic run, and it's just amazing how they try to create a certain narrative as it relates to those cities. However, when we go back to DC, not DC, but Baltimore, you know, their crime is already going down. DC's crime has already been going down because the mayor had put in certain systems in place that led to a decrease in crime. So him going there or sending troops there, uh, especially considering time, the length of time that they're going to be there, most likely they'll be there maybe 30 days. And then they'll even say we brought the crime down, as if he may get one day of Fox News for that. But we know that if you're dealing with crime in its truest sense, and we want to look at longitudinal data, it has to be over a longer period of time. But the other piece for me is something that David said, but um, as it relates to the Nothing Burger, this is all a diversion and a distraction from what's really going on. And even MAGA's not focused on this themselves; they're still focused on Epstein. And to create all of this chaos to try to get people to start looking in one direction is amazing. And even the Trump DOJ, I think a judge just denied them. They wanted to release the grand jury documents, and the judge said no. But they don't want to release the documents that were actually a part of the investigation as it relates to Epstein. Because again, that's going to have the names of any and everybody that was involved, as opposed to what the grand jury might have did in their report to base their decision on that particular case. So again, as far as I see it with this particular piece, it's just a distraction and a diversion from what the American people have been asking for and what he promised that he was going to release all throughout his campaign. So he stirred them up to get their vote, but now he's denying them the very, very promise that he made because their focus was really Clinton in the Epstein files. And Don knows that he's there. And if he goes and erases his name and let everybody else be outed, then they're going to eventually out him as well. So he's in a catch 22 where he's damned if he do and damned if he don't. And I think that's probably what the hell's going on.
Jeez. He better start using A1 to figure out some things. Everybody, if you're not using A1, you're behind the times. You got to get on that A1 and use that Chat GPT. Okay, that's my favorite A1 to use. Um, I looked up a random place because I've been stationed in Oklahoma before, and there's a city called Lawton, Oklahoma. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but it has one of the highest crime rates in the country. It's 50.09 per 1,000 people experience crime in Lawton,
A lot.
huh?
I live there. So
Lawton, Oklahoma.
that's the home of Fort Sill, home
Yeah,
of the field artillery.
yeah, I know it's the home of the field artillery. I know,
I'm a
but
red leg, okay?
so a red leg in a red state. All right. So, it's time to hear about. We're going to get Dave on his high horse. I don't know, high horse. I
Uh-oh.
don't know what's going on with my verbiage today. Everything that I've said all week has been
Soapbox.
like the wrong segue.
I think the term you're looking for is get me on my soapbox.
Yeah, you're
Uh-oh.
so. I said
Uh-oh.
high horse. No, Dave's not getting on a soapbox. But Dave, we haven't had one of these in a while, so we're going to get into a Ukraine update.
Be interesting.
Well, we All right. So the Ukraine update. We just had massive developments in Ukraine. And so a lot of attention was given to the Putin meeting. And that did not go well. According to Fox News and to a lot of conservative folks, and there was a lot of, the big problem is that in the course of this meeting, Trump not only didn't get a ceasefire, but he walked back from demanding a ceasefire before the peace process began. Because one of the things that everyone in Europe was trying to say, look, we have to have a ceasefire before we do any peace negotiations. Well, Trump walked back from that, which allows Putin to continue his war, unabated, and so it was not a complete disaster. It could have been a lot worse. From a lot of people were worried about it being worse. Now, wait a minute, because out of nowhere, some very interesting and productive stuff happened. So Friday, we have this whole thing, right? The European leaders talked amongst themselves. On Sunday, right? They took a day to get their act together. On Sunday, they met in Europe and they, discuss what are we going to do about this? How are we going to do it? And somehow or other, by Monday, these guys are in the White House meeting with Trump, right? I mean, this is like the most wild thing I've seen in negotiations. Well, there may be examples, but this is just Hollywood shit, right? Like all of a sudden, these guys are all in the White House the next day after meeting in Europe on Sunday. And they went through and gave very coordinated statements. And they got Trump on board with the idea of of creating peace guarantees security guarantees for Ukraine. Got Trump to at least say that he wouldn't rule out using U.S. troops, and they choreographed a very positive unitary front. They troop out the NATO guy who's not elected and can flatter Trump, right? And talk about how great Trump is and thanking him for starting all this stuff. And they put together this unified front. Zelensky's there. Zelensky manages to figure out thread the sartorial needle or the fashion needle between not dressing in a suit, which in Ukrainian is custom, I think, or it sounds like costume. But he, puts on a jacket and looks spiffy and has a very positive discussion with Trump. So Monday, like everything is totally different. And the situation is, for the moment, way better. And you look at it and you go, wow. And I kind of looked at it, I said, well, why didn't we do that first? Right? That would have been the good way to do it. And my read on this is in many ways a very Trump-like scenario. This is where Trump is being Trump, where he goes into lead, he goes with his instincts, he gets into trouble with a project. And then he brings in other people, or other people come in, right? Creditors, or sometimes he would, with the Hudson Yards, he brought a lot of his opponents on board, and they reset, and he fails upward, right? And so, what I saw on Monday was the European leaders doing what they have figured out how to do, which is to, I, I don't know if we want to say play Trump, but to uh, get on Trump's good side and get him on board with a plan. And you actually had some of the best progress, and we still lost ground because the ceasefire thing fell off the radar, or the conditions. But we have this very big change, and so I've said that what Trump is going to do with Ukraine is going to depend on who comes to him with a plan. And whoever came to him with the summit plan didn't deliver. The European leaders have gotten together, they've gotten on his good side. They have, somehow, I can't wait to hear the history of what actually happened behind the scenes on this. But it looks like they got to him with a plan. Let's do this. And now we did it. And so it's, as far as Trump criticism goes, this is going to be in the win column. And I think it's it's kind of the way he did in business. Is he, would screw things up and muddle through and manage to fail upwards by getting a lot of folks in to help him. And so in the end, though, I think it worked. So, I'm not harshly criticizing the Trump administration for a change. Of course, they screwed up everything before this, but, this was a very positive development. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, the war, one thing that really chaps my is seeing all these folks, oh, the war's going well for Russia, or Russia's advancing. They've had a summer offensive that was very successful. When both sides have a really tough time, right? The Ukrainians have huge manpower problems. Their population is weary of the war. They don't get a lot of people wanting to be in the infantry, so they're having trouble generating manpower. Man, they make drones. They have revolutionized warfare, and they are using drones so effectively that the Russians are unable to move units close to the front lines in any appreciable size. So what have the Russians been doing? They've been infiltrating people in like pairs, right? And they will send just individual like pairs of people out, and they will infiltrate, and they'll find their way through the drones, hiding for the drones, and then they get a bunch of people somewhere and they resupply them. And this is how they're moving the war forward. And this whole recent discussion of there being this advance near Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk was a city that this time last year, all the worry was, oh, they're going to take over Pokrovsk. A year later, they still haven't done it. And these past weeks, we've had, oh, they're advancing. There's this big movement. They've taken these areas. Turns out it's just some guys up there. And the Ukrainians said, all right, well, we should go clean that up. And they've sent a battalion in, and they are completely rolling all these guys back. And I mean, when you read on the battlefield of they just send guys out with a map and another guy, and they wander around trying to get somewhere and radio back. I mean, it's degenerated, right? It's an unreal situation out there, all because the Ukrainians have just become so deadly with their drones. And this is a situation where the Ukrainians don't have the manpower to really advance. They can hold the line. They lose to infiltration, but these gains are fragile. They're very often ephemeral, right? Russians will go into into an area, they'll infiltrate in, take selfies with the town in the town square. Oh, we took this town, and the same afternoon, they'll leave. The Ukrainians will go in and take their own selfies, right? So that's what I'm saying is that this is not blitzkrieg, man. This is not. This is a very weird situation, and yet we're reporting Russian advances. The narrative is out there. And I don't think we appreciate that, how deadlocked this war is. And at this point, and this is before, I always say if Russia could ever get its act together and push farther in, the Ukrainians will get help, right? The Europeans will come off the bench. And so, it's a war Putin can't win. And without massive help from the United States and Europe, without an escalation of help that they seem not able to do without the U.S. Ukraine probably won't. So we were at a stalemate, which is exactly when you're supposed to negotiate a finish to the war. But negotiations here are going to be really difficult because Ukraine can't cede territory based on their constitution. They're not going to want, Europe isn't going to want to cede territory to Russia for a lot of reasons. And so we have a really thorny question. And I think the reason the Europeans want a ceasefire is because if you can get a ceasefire, you can freeze things, stop the killing, but you don't have to actually give up anything on either side. You don't have to deal with these irreconcilable conflicts of what they want, right? Putin wants these areas that he's annexed. Ukraine cannot give up those areas according to its constitution. They'd have to change the constitution. They're not there yet. And so this whole situation, it looked like, to my mind, that they were going to try to get a ceasefire, freeze things in place, and have kind of a North Korea situation where you don't really have an end to you have a frozen conflict, right? But I don't necessarily see it, right? Putin is not convinced that that's in his interest, and so the situation is just kind of continuing on without a real resolution. But the battlefield, is very static. Russians are making gains at the most incremental level, at the slowest pace possible, and so the war, to say one side is winning or losing, is very problematic at this point. That was a lot. Sorry.
Any other questions about that on the other side?
Yes. Wake up, Harold.
Come at me, bro.
Harold got some questions. Before I can say that, I'm going to correct myself earlier when I said CBS being canceled. It's not that they're being canceled. After the $9 billion cut to public education was approved, CPS got several of their grants cut, and the funding that they are provided cut. So in some local areas, CBS is still functioning well, even though they're facing more and more financial challenges. A lot of the stations will have to scale back their programming, and some of their shows will have to go on a long time hiatus, especially some of their more expensive shows like Sesame Street. So that's the update on that, what I was talking about. So we know they've had drastic budget cuts for PBS. I said CBS in one of those.
Yes,
But
you did. Yes, you did.
CBS is still around.
It's been a long week. I suffer from insomnia, so I've had 2.5 hours of sleep in 2 days. So I'm working on it. But Harold, go ahead with your questions.
Awesome. But also, with all of these numbers adjustments, like the job numbers, I know that there was an many people have been fact checking Doge's reported quote unquote savings on all of the I guess cuts that they made during their prominence. And I'm trying to figure out what words to use so that I don't, I'm trying not to use profanity anymore. I didn't forget the words, I just try not to use them. But with the fact checking on that, it seems that we are seeing a lot of adjustments. But going to your Ukraine-Russia update, and first of all, thank you for that. I'm curious. I keep hearing reports of North Korean troops being involved. How true or factual is that? And do we know roughly what those numbers look like? And then are there casualties as well?
A lot of casualties. They're being slaughtered. With the anecdotal, because it's all anecdotal. But I think there was 20,000 of them, and they were using them because Russia they need it. I think the Russians aren't really thrilled with them. They have huge language problems, and a lot of the secondhand stuff I'm getting from people who read Russian mill bloggers, right? They're not happy with the quality of the troops. They don't think they're very good. they also the troop they also don't seem to they treat their troops horribly, and so they're their own people, right? How do you think they're going to treat North Koreans? I've seen video of North Korean units in combat, and they have not learned the lesson that I just described, that you cannot move platoon-sized elements or even sometimes squad-sized elements. Forget company and battalion. You cannot move large numbers of people near the front without getting swarmed by drones. And I've seen footage of these guys getting, exactly that happening, because they are going with their doctrine and their understanding of things. And so I honestly haven't heard much about the North Koreans in a few months, though.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate the update.
They were doing, by the way, they also reckoned of the North Korean munitions, because North Korea has been sending a lot of ammunition. They have their own factories to make their own stuff that fits Soviet era weaponry. I think the dud rate's like 50% or close to 50% on these things. And so they've been sending very large quantities of low quality stuff. Iran is a more important supplier to Russia in some ways, but North Korea's quality may improve, and they may be a very important supplier of material, because even a dud artillery round is a big old hit on the ground. So
I'd never want to be a troop in a military that's aiding another military that's seen as the superior military, because my mind is always going to think, yeah, I'm here to be cannon fodder.
That's what the Russians. That's what they're using their own troops for, and they very clearly have groups of their categories of troop from their own country, which isn't a unified nation. It's a federation of all these folks. They have a lot of non-European peoples in there, and so people who are not ethnically Russian are very frequently put in these positions and used as cannon fodder. And there's this one report of a guy they took prisoner, and he said that he had been out there for a month and was just repeatedly being sent out with a guy and told to go this way, and he would go that direction, then make contact with a Russian unit. The guy with him dies. He makes contact with the unit. They give him another guy, and they send him back out. And apparently he went through 3 or 4 partners before the Ukrainians captured him. And he's like, "Oh, thank God," But this is this. They really are losing. They're just losing insane numbers of people for the size of this conflict and the utter lack of gain involved in it. The numbers are staggering. And so it's shocking the way they're doing this from any point of view. And so there you
go.
I just always like the way I never know how he's going to end. It's either going to be on a high note, or it's like,
it's sad.
It is.
At some level, these are guys that are out serving their country. How are they different from me when I was carrying a rifle? Right.
And then the problem is, as people are, measuring their dick sizes and having ego and wanting to be the person that solves the problem instead of just getting to the solution, while all that's happening, people are constantly being killed. So that's the issue, right? Oh, we'll get to a ceasefire. We'll get to a ceasefire. Nobody wants to get to a ceasefire faster than the people who are getting shot up and blown up.
Putin doesn't. There's there's not a real benefit for him of having a ceasefire. If he has a ceasefire, if he loses the war as a means of controlling the economy, of claiming an existential threat, of collecting money and distributing it around to folks through the defense industries. If he doesn't have that, he may be in big trouble. And also, if peace takes over, all of the news of what happened, in the Soviet Union, it was the troops coming back from Afghanistan that brought the truth and brought this in. And you're going to have people if they ratchet down the security tensions, a securitization of the situation to where people can talk about it a little, they're going to have a real problem. And so he's got a lot of levels of, so I don't know. I don't see how he's better off with a ceasefire. Russia's better off with a ceasefire, but is Putin and his grasp on power less secure? Or, or more or less secure if he has a ceasefire? I'd tend to say I'm thinking I can make a better case that it would be less secure.
Oh, it's just there's such a just it's always a crappy place. There's no winners, right? There's no actual winners in this.
Meanwhile, we're testing a weapon that will fry drones left and right, and we're, it is funny to see the mismatch between U.S. military capabilities and Russian military they're descending ones, and a lot of these things that they're having problems with. A lot of people are like, "Oh, drones are the new thing, and the U.S. has to be worried about it." But no, we have F-35s.
We're not to be worried about it because we're going to keep doing things like increase defense budget spending and cut education budget.
Yeah, I mean that is true. That is so true.
It's just so stupid. I mean, uh, you know. Anyway, what do you do, right? What do you do? Well, you get out in the time to vote and you vote at all levels instead of just complaining all year. Um, and don't be surprised when you get what you get. Yeah, that's all I can do. Anyway, it's been a great episode. Thank you, Dave, for coming back with the conversation with Harold and Dave, talking about our current events and what's going on. We will see you next week at 8 p.m. I'll be in a much better mood, and we'll have a great show. Thank you guys for tonight, and
Thank you.
keep looking up. Things are going to get better.
Peace.
Dave, you are the
Waiting for the zinger. I was
You
like
are?
bracing for impact. I was like
Well, hey,
thinking, trying to come up with some way to insult me on the
bracing
way.
for impact. I don't want to know what you do on a Tuesday night.
Yeah.